Hey guys, Samantha Yarock virtually alongside Brian Dunseth for another RSL playoff preview. Dunny RSL taking care of business again at Kansas City. Dramatic winner. What impressed you most about their 2-1 win over Kansas City in the Western Conference semifinals on Sunday?
Yeah, I would say that it looked so drastically different than what we saw in Seattle. And for Seattle, we can understand, right? You lose Albert, hours, a couple days before the start of that game in Seattle, and the difficulty of trying to figure out exactly the balance, the rhythm of play, and how you can replicate maybe collectively what the individual loss is in Albert. But having that extra week and going into Kansas City self-beat was a miracle. 2.5 weeks earlier. It was a team performance that was really impressive. I mean, a Sporting Kansas City side at home, I don't care if Polito's 100% or not 100%. This is still a team that was within one match of winning the Western Conference. So that talks about consistency in terms of their performance over the course of the season. But from the opening whistle, I was impressed with the pragmatic possession. I was impressed with kind of getting into spaces. I was impressed with the defensive performance. And the last couple of games, the defensive performance has really been impressive after the switch back to the back four and getting everyone back healthy. So all those things, plus, you think about substitution patterns. You think about Pablo's perspective of recognizing that he needed to make subs and then getting the performance from Anderson Julio, Justin Merrim, and Bobby Wood off the bench. I just think collectively this was a fantastic performance for Real Salt Lake on the road.
And RSL is now one of 4 remaining teams in the playoffs. Are you surprised?
Listen, anybody that says that they're not surprised is lying to you. We're all surprised. I thought this was a playoff team, but I also understood the competitive nature of the Western Conference and how difficult it is to navigate the Western Conference playoffs. Because when you're talking about injuries, you're talking about form, you're talking about suspensions, you're talking about referee decisions or lack thereof. There's so many different variables that come to play. So like we saw in Colorado, like we saw in New England, just because you were really good during the regular season doesn't mean that you're going to win an MLS Cup.
Doesn't translate to the MLS postseason. And I'm not sure if in hindsight, having that 23-day layoff really benefits anyone, but enough of that. So Albert Rusnak back in full training after missing the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. What do you expect him to bring to this lineup? Do you think that Pablo's going to change anything, or is it just going to be business as usual when Albert's in the lineup?
Yeah, I think Albert has to come right back into the starting 11 just because what he brings and being the captain. And it's not because he's the captain, but it's more about what he brings to the team, and a guy that wants to be on the ball, a guy that wants to kind of start that link up play. I said this earlier, I think I said it last week, kind of the Javier Morales type. You can rely on a Luis Gil, but it's not Javier Morales, right? You can rely on a Michael Chang or whoever, insert name here, but it's just not the same as Albert. No disrespect to anybody else. It's just it's a little bit different of a skill set. So we know that the difficult question for Pablo isn't about necessarily Albert. I think it's more about figuring out what they're going to do with Everton Luis suspended.
That was going to be my next question to you. Who slides in there? What do you do?
So, I mean, common sense would say you just slot Nick Beasler in, but obviously there's a difference, right? The physicality is different. Could you drop Albert next to Pablo Ruiz and play Dami in that same position and still play Michael and Johnny Y and still bring guys off the bench like Anderson Julio, Justin Merrim, and Bobby Wood to be impact players? The only reason I suggest that is because there's kind of this narrative that Albert, is he a central midfielder? Is he a 10? Is he a wide player? What's his best role? Albert's so intelligent. I don't think people recognize.
Yeah, he can play anywhere if he needed to.
You could put Albert at right back. So I think there's a couple, the thing for Pablo to think about is how he wants to start the game. The other thing to remind everybody is that with Blanco and Asprilla being out, it changes the complexion. I know we'll talk about Portland, but it changes the complexion about how you prepare, because when you kind of have a little bit of a wounded animal that Portland is, when you lose two starters, and in particular, you're losing Blanco, who was by far the MVP in the second half of the season,
100%.
it changes the way that they are going to play. So Gio, I think, has more questions than Pablo has with regards to his starting 11, as crazy as that might sound.
Does Portland still have that speed in transition, the ability to punish teams on counterattacks without those two star players? Because I know you mentioned Blanco. Asprilla has been named, Mr. October. Even when I was there back in 2015, he always was heating up in the postseason. To have those two out is a big deal. Does it change their speed in particular, where RSL has been punished in the first couple games this year?
Yeah, absolutely it does. Because Sebastian Blanco was a 10, but he was also a winger. And his attributes into the channel and in transition were extraordinary. And we saw that in Portland, and we saw that at Rio Tinto Stadium. With Asprilla, out and out runner. And I'm not to suggest that, it's just about the physicality, because his mind puts him in those positions where he can, be in fantastic positions and duel against opponents. But it's just different. So, historically it was Diego Valeri's team. But the second half of the season, this is Sebastian Blanco's team. Chara gets the armband, Blanco's pulling the strings, and that is unfortunately at the end of this historic run with Portland. Because really quick, and I know Diego and his family really well, to have had the opportunity to get to know Diego over the years, I have continually said that if you want to take the blueprint of how to find a designated player that has the ability to take you to a different level on the field, but more importantly, off the field, be such an important member of the community for both the men's and the women's game, you find a Diego Valeri. And I know those are unicorns. I know those are needles in a haystack. But I just
we have one here in Damir Krylak.
Yeah, no, that's a good shout. Yeah, it's a good shout. And different price point. But
yeah, 100%. I think Damir actually ended up over achieving what most people thought when they brought him in. So, but yes, no, when I think of incredible.
The humanity side that matches up. It links up. But yeah, so do you give Valeri a run in a game like this? Do you go with Moreno, who's got a little bit more range and physicality and ability to run wide? If you look at just who was on the 18-man roster, is it Laria playing in that wide position? Do you start to chop and change a little bit? Do you change the formation? I know you know this, but Gio was a former teammate of mine at the New England Revolution, super close with him. And having done a couple games this year, specifically with ESPN, getting to pick his brain and spend time with him privately, I think what he's done is set his team up that's capable in playing in arguably 4, 5, maybe even 6 different formations based on who's available. So the two question marks that he has to answer, Sebastian Blanco and Dairon Asprilla, but I'd also say Mora and Nisgoda, who has flip-flopped the last 2 matches in terms of starting at the 0.9. I think the team picks itself as long as it's healthy, but there's at least 2 difficult decisions to make, maybe 3, depending upon who he likes for Mora and Nisgoda leading the line for Portland. So
as someone that worked in Portland for 3.5 years and then obviously have covered them from afar, working for another Western Conference team, I'm just amazed by the longevity and the athleticism of Diego Chara to this day. The fact that he still is doing what he can do, and people can argue he's not what he once was. I mean, he's getting older, but the guy, he's so smart. He's one of those people that he's like Damir in his preparation. There's just all it is for him is family and football. So you have someone like that. If you can take him out of the game, wouldn't you essentially be able to win? I mean, I just look at it and he's the engine of that team. Yeah, and he's the antagonist as well. And I've always had, and I'll call it the trifecta of Chihuahuas. It's Diego Chara, it's Ozzie Alonso, and it's Kyle Beckerman. And I put those guys in the same category because, and there's always going to be a debate, right? Depending on what fan base you're in. But I put those guys in the same category because
the longevity of their career, the importance of their personality in the locker room, and ultimately what they do on the field. And for Diego, I'm just, he's got this Cheshire cat kind of baby smile that that he's
Nicest person off the field.
Yeah, which is great. And when you cross that white line, I know plenty of guys. Eddie Pope was like this. You got the sweetheart, and then all of a sudden he crosses the white line and he becomes an absolute killer. And I think Chara's like that. And I love his game because he does just enough to let you know that he's always there. And whether it's a tug, if it's a pull, if it's a little nip at the heels, that's why I call him like the little angry chihuahua, because he's biting. He's always biting at a player with the ball, and he covers so much ground, and he's so quick. So I still to this day think that Diego Chara has been wildly underrated for how good of a player he is. And I guess because of his size, it reminds me a lot, like if you're a Premier League fan, you think of like N'Golo Kanté, just because of the ground that he covers, and so how precise he is on the ball. So if you can minimize his involvement, that's great. And we have our own, right? Everton Luis is kind of the perfect equivalent of Diego Chara. Obviously, he's going to be missing. Yeah. But a guy that's going to be in your face, a guy that's going to foul, the guy's going to be confrontational, be antagonistic. He's going to be great in possession. He's going to knock down plays. He's going to disrupt the flow of the opponent. And he's going to have that wry little smile. Like,
yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's so great. Which brings me back, I guess, to the point of Everton being out. I know we touched on it a little bit, but in an ideal world, what do you do? Because not having that person that is able, we joke all the time, especially in the broadcast about Everton, he's taken off again, he's bombing forward, but he does have that speed where he can get back in time if all else fails, and is able to be that antagonist, get in the opponent's face, just be that annoying little, always chirping in your ear. What do you do without him?
Yeah, I'm not sure how well, first off, you can't replace it. There's just not another player on the roster that can immediately slot in. And it goes back to, I think, the evolution of the league in that position is becoming more and more important. And I think you're going to see over the course of this window a specific discretionary spend across the league for finding more number sixes. Because those type, the Martinez types in Philly, the Raveloson types in LA Galaxy, the Atuesta types down at LAFC, I just think you're going to see more high-level TAM and maybe low-level designated player positions come in, because it's such an important phase of the game. And this kind of goes to the bigger picture of MLS discretionary spending usually is on the attacking phase of play. And now we're kind of seeing a counterbalance of center backs and defensive midfielders to combat some of this spending.
Right. Well, if you can't keep them out of the goal, you're never going to have a chance of winning.
Yeah, you're not gonna give a rookie center back the job of marking like an $18 million attacking player. So again, logic tells you the player that would slot in should be Nick Beasler, because that's the third man in the rotation alongside Paulo Ruiz. But you could play Domi there, and we've seen Domi play. You could play Albert there. We've seen Albert play. And those are kind of the three options, because in this, the pressure for Paulo Ruiz is he matches Everton's intensity, and he gets hot chirping at the referee, and he gets so wound up, and he's so like, flying off the hook. So now he's got to find this unique balance of not trying to replicate what Everton's personality brings to the field, and being that kind of little bit of calmer influence at the same time being antagonistic. So whoever Pablo goes with is going to be a fascinating choice, because it's going to be a big call, because as we know, even with the missing Asprilla and Blanco, that Portland is very, very comfortable in either the buildup or the transition. And it's all about the balance and positional balance for Real Salt Lake in Portland.
Portland Timbers swept RSL in all games in the regular season. What do RSL need to do differently this time around to get out of there, move on to MLS Cup?
Well, I think they've already done it. They've switched to a flat four. I think they're pragmatic defensively, not as wide open, in the hunt for trying to get Albert into his best position and get more numbers going forward, there was a sacrifice, and that sacrifice was not having a Marcelo Silva available, not really having a Brody available. So I think those questions have been answered. And Pablo's right. You know, the onus, the emphasis is going to be on Portland. And so this is on two phases. The onus and impetus to attack and score goals is going to be on Portland. On top of this, and you know this, and I've talked to so many players in Portland about this, Sam, the pressure inside of that stadium starts to build and ratchet up. And while it is in favor of Portland, I think there comes that time where the players, and I've had multiple players admit this to me privately and off record, that the pressure starts to build against them.
If they're not scoring, if they're trailing, you can feel it.
And that pressure, the fans want them go, go, go. And over the years, we've seen that come back to haunt them because players are like, I got to go. I got to go. I got to run. I got to make this. I'm going to jump. All of a sudden, ball turns over, hitting the transition, goal scored. So, again, from Merritt to Gavin to Ned to Gio and his staff to Yamosa.
Carlos, your old teammate.
I've played with Carlos down in Miami. I've got the utmost respect for these guys and what they've done. And by the way, I was explaining this to Brandon Steinecker. I was sitting with him for the Portland game at Rio Tinto Stadium. And when you look at the way Portland has constructed their roster, it's heavily international. And they've taken their North American assets and flipped them within the league to then build more allocation money and go out. And outside of Steve Clark, I mean, Eric Williamson, who's obviously just returning from that ACL injury, but not going to play a part in this game. He's just on the field finally. And Steve Clark are really the only American guys. So they have relied heavily on the international experience. And I think cultivated one hell of a roster, which is why in the beginning of the playoffs, I had them as my dark horse coming out of the Western Conference.
Okay, so last question for you. I'm just curious, what has been your favorite moment in RSL's playoff extravaganza so far?
In the playoffs, favorite moment. You know me, I like the dark arts. So the whole Ochoa thing has been fun for me. I giggle out of it, and just watching the fans kind of boo him and him just eat it up. He's loving every second of it. I really enjoyed Anderson coming off the bench and having such a huge impact.
Yeah.
I think recognizing that while it probably isn't the role that he's wanted this season, that he is thriving coming off the bench and running at exhausted defenders. And I think giving him 20 minutes in Kansas City was the perfect time.
Smart.
I said also, I'm going to go with the three players coming off the bench in Kansas City.
Okay.
And I'll explain why. I said from the beginning on the broadcast this year, Justin has a big role to play.
Yep.
I don't know if that's in the starting 11 or off the bench, but I just think he's got a specific skill set that could come in big time at some point this year. And I think in a few occasions we've seen him pop up for huge goals. In Dallas specifically, obviously.
Dallas, KC again.
Yep. And then for Bobby, I mean, this is not the season Bobby wanted. We all knew that he had to work himself back to the point where he finally starts to get back and then pops his hammy, even a little bit of a setback before the Seattle match.
Yeah.
Come off the bench. And in real time, everybody thought he hit it with his left foot, but I actually saw that he got there before the defender and flicked it with the outside of his right. And it's such a highly technical type of finish that I don't think still to this point, Sam, that it's gotten enough credit that it deserves, because that's a type of finish that is so insanely difficult, and he's done it perfectly. So I would say just watching those guys who
coming off the bench.
Yeah, that didn't have huge roles this year, having huge roles when it mattered.
It's amazing. And I always think back to what Pablo told us about maybe a month or two ago. At this point, I've lost all concept of time, but when he described Anderson as the closer, like the pitcher that comes in at the end to close out the game. And I just think that's the perfect description for Anderson, coming in, being able to run everyone else to the ground, get the job done.
Yep, I agree. I agree. And by the way, I have a feeling Johnny's going to play a big role in Portland. I don't know why, but I have a feeling he went off the boil. I felt like because of the switch to 3 in the back, and
Yeah.
I don't want to say he lost his confidence, but he didn't have that kind of killer instinct. And I just think in a game like this in small margins, there's just like a little bit of extra in him that not a lot of players have. So
And also with Albert, I think he plays better when Albert is there, because without Albert, we're obviously missing the guy that can actually
link up.
Yes. So I agree with you. Hopefully Johnny has a big impact. Hopefully everyone does. And we can move on to MLS Cup. That's what's at stake this weekend. Be sure to tune in to watch RSL take on the Portland Timbers Saturday, December 4th at 4:30 p.m. Mountain Time. You can watch on Fox Sports 1. Dunny, any last thoughts?
First and second balls. I think that's going to dictate what this game looks like. Challenging for the first ball is going to be important. More importantly, winning that second ball, because if you can't get a hold of that second ball in the midfield, that's where I think Portland's at its most dangerous in transition.